During Vladimir Putin's strange televised national security meeting last week, he forced his advisors to one by one say that they agreed with his military decisions.
На границах Луганской и Донецкой области.
Россия – страна конфликта.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович,
Speaking Russian reporter, he publicly humiliated Sergei Narishkin, head of foreign intelligence, for stumbling over his lines and suggesting perhaps the worst.
в данном случае вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс? Нет, или признавать суверенитет их. Говорите прямо.
That's the $300 billion question a lot of people are asking after the US, European Union, and other allied nations slammed harsh economic sanctions on the country in response to its decision to invade Ukraine. Sanctions are already devastating the country economically. The ruble has taken a beating, losing 50% of its value on Monday after the sanctions were announced over the weekend. The currency has continued to slump over the past several days, at one point dropping an additional 8% on Wednesday. Before the crisis began, the Bank of Russia said its reserves were sufficient to cover 20 months' worth of imports. That figure is likely to be 10 months now. But Russia can likely still tap around $300 billion in foreign currency and gold reserves after the US and various other governments said they would cut off the Bank of Russia's ability to access foreign exchange reserves held in their territories. That includes some $132 billion in gold that it holds in the Bank of Russia's own vaults, as well as foreign currency that it holds domestically or holds abroad in countries like China that have not agreed to enforce sanctions against Russia. Russia spent about $62 billion on its military in total in 2021, and the invasion of Ukraine may send that figure soaring. One estimate from the Ukrainian-based Center for Economic Recovery, a think tank close to Ukraine's government, has estimated that the first 5 days of the war may have cost Russia as much as $7 billion in direct military costs. Still, most of Russia's military equipment is produced domestically using domestic raw materials, so Putin may be able to get away with covering those costs with inflated rubles. Russia may be seriously hurt from sanctions, but it will not run out of cash fast enough to save Ukraine, Kenneth Rogoff, an economics professor at Harvard University and former International Monetary Fund and US Federal Reserve official, told Fortune. It doesn't feel like that's very realistic to hope for, he said. But he added that doesn't mean the sanctions won't have a political effect. What's very possible is they hit a point where the pain starts getting more difficult for Putin to manage, even though he has absolute. The Russian economy might be taking some serious hits, but Moscow still has tools at its disposal to keep its hard currency reserves from being completely exhausted. Earlier this week, it ordered major commodity exporters and energy companies to sell 80% of their own foreign currency holdings, in the hopes that this would help support the ruble without the Bank of Russia having to spend down its own reserves. It has also barred foreign investors from selling securities and taking money out of the country, which should also lessen the burn rate of those reserves. The country has temporarily stopped paying interest to foreign investors on its $29 billion in ruble-denominated government debt. While those skipped coupon payments put the country into technical default, it doesn't mean the country is actually insolvent. Quite the opposite, the missed payments allow it to use the currency for other things, like a war, and they hurt foreign creditors. While Kierkegaard said that Putin could print rubles to cover the costs of the war, without a steady stream of foreign exchange to back up those rules, he would risk hyperinflation. Given that Putin's main source of domestic political legitimacy, according to Kierkegaard, is that many Russians credit him with having restored the country's financial stability after the economic chaos it experienced in the 1990s, hyperinflation would severely damage Putin politically. Rogoff was less sanguine about the possibility that the sanctions will cause enough economic pain to force Putin's ouster. He noted that Russia was also hit with sanctions after its 2014 annexation of Crimea, with the ruble losing 2/3 of its value and average consumers seeing their purchasing power, especially of imported goods, crushed, and yet Putin remained firmly in power. There was no revolt against Putin, no regime change that time, he said. Nevertheless, it's a different world. This could be worse. Even if Europe does cut off Russian energy purchases, it is likely that Russia could still find willing buyers. Neighboring Belarus, which has become essentially a puppet state of Putin, buys all of its energy from Russia. Then there's China. Russia is already the Asian giant's third largest energy supplier, and in February, at a meeting between Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, the two countries announced a series of oil and gas deals worth a reported $117.5 billion over a period of decades. Russia could also still find buyers in Southeast Asia. Just this week, Pakistan announced a deal to import Russian natural gas as well as wheat. Actually completing those exports may be tough though. Already there are reports that international commodity trading firms are not finding buyers willing to take Russian crude oil, even at steep discounts. In one case, Russian oil was being offered at an unprecedented $18 per barrel discount to the benchmark price, and still there were no buyers. One big issue is that shipping companies that control the world's oil tankers are refusing to load Russian crude. These companies fear inadvertently running afoul of financial sanctions, especially those around transacting business with some Russian banks, as well as the potential damage to their reputations if there's public outcry over them helping Russia deliver its oil. So while there are no official sanctions on Russian energy exports yet, in practice Russia is finding it more difficult to move its oil and gas. It is possible Russia will have to further discount these energy exports, selling far below market rates to find buyers, Kierkegaard said. Limits to how much oil and gas Russia can store mean that, if it cannot find ways to export what it is producing, it may have to begin shutting down production. This will also complicate Russia's calculus, he said. But with that benchmark price skyrocketing as high as $120 per barrel as a result of its invasion, the highest it has been since 2014, Russia might still earn more than before, even after taking a substantial haircut. So it is likely that Russia will be able to prosecute the war without actually burning through all of its hard currency. But that does not mean the economic hardship, particularly on average Russians, won't be severe. Rogov said that he worries that the biggest danger is that economic pain compels Putin to lash out with some kind of more damaging direct retaliation against the US and Europe. When people are looking at the different things we can do to Russia, they are failing to recognize this is not like attacking Iraq. This is a nuclear power with cyber capabilities, biological warfare capabilities, he said. For this reason, he said, he thought the US, the EU, and their allies would probably stop short of taking action that would force Russia